Hey, Kapil. Um, my question is around, well, let me just start with it. So for quite some time, I've been trying to get into, like a meditative state. And I spent a lot of time reading this and watching that. And eventually I stopped all of that. And I think it lines up with what you talked about in regards to prescriptions. But anyways, long story short, a lot of frustration, after a lot of frustration, I've realized something somewhat ridiculous. And what that is once there's this effortlessness, there's something that arises. And it led me to realize that maybe meditation isn't a thing to do, but it's something that occurs. It's something that happens. But what I get stuck in is then I end up being back in thinking patterns, and I'm sort of stuck on the whole, I hate to use the word concept, but the idea, I guess, of watching thoughts. I understand it intellectually, but I don't really understand it. And so my question is, like, is this just a mind trick? And maybe it's my desire to see thoughts that's exactly what's keeping me from it? Or is there something else that I don't understand yet?
Well, I don't think that you understand fully. I mean, you've just gotten a very minute taste of the ineffectuality of prescriptions. But then you've categorized them as some as not so good and others having some potential. So your lack of understanding comes from perhaps the lack of experience of having tested all the prescriptions in order to see through them all. You still think that some of them are actually going to benefit you in the non-mechanical realms.
Okay.
Hello, Kapil. You have mentioned before in the past about Buddha reaching a state of sort of enlightenment in a sort of singular moment of uncompromising sort of devotion to truth. My question is truth understood in a sort of singular, uncompromising, devotional sort of experience? Or is it something that is understood over many truths, over time, over many understandings? Thank you.
No, I don't think it's conditional in that regard. I mean, I think human beings have had realizations, for instance, that, after having gone through an experience, they had a deep realization about it, and it, that part of them changed and they never went back because it was realized and it was done. So I don't think it's some spiritual thing. I think it's very practical. But, whatever does or does not lead to it, I don't think it's this devotional moment of, bliss and romanticized. No, I think it's very practical. But what is required is to realize truths is a devotion. There's no sitting under a tree and going to the forest. I mean, you can if you want, but there is a seriousness that is required. I don't think things have to be. I don't even like the story of the Buddha, because too much of it is romanticized. Walking on lotus petals blossoming underneath his feet. It's all just romanticized. A lot of it's just hyperbole, and that makes it a story. So one has to keep their feet on the ground. If something isn't practical, it's nonsense. That's why spirituality has no meaning. It isn't. It's on the one hand, something can be practical in terms of it can be practiced. That doesn't make it effective. On the other hand, it can be spiritual and pie in the sky. That doesn't make it effective. So it isn't about the romanticizing of things. It's, do you want it or not?
Thank you for your work. I can't thank you enough for the writings that you have put out there. My question is, can the five senses be trusted? Or in other words, are all the truths recognized by sensory inputs alone? given there is no conditioning or the filter with which you see things?
Yeah, what are you asking?
I've heard you mention, things like communion with truth and being able to access truths from an unnameable place and things like that, and it fascinates me. At the same time, I couldn't understand that. From
See,
the instrument that we have.
The problem is not the brain that you have. The problem is the desire that you have. And that desire that human beings have is misplaced, because it's placed in the direction of the world and worldly knowledge. Now, that worldly knowledge which you require for your work and material things is fine. But I'm talking about with regard to otherworldly things in one's life that are not mechanical or technical. Even in those things, the human being does not have a desire for those things. So, because he lacks the desire, he begins to ask about fancy things like going beyond the senses and achieving the truth in some fanciful moment underneath, a tree, a banyan tree or something. He goes to those fancy places because he lacks just the basic second-grade desire for the truth. So if he had that desire, it doesn't matter if what brain he has. He would orient it in the direction of wanting to seek the truth, as opposed to having it oriented towards wanting more prescriptions. So it's nothing. The more spiritual you make it, the further and further you move away from truth. The more, all these things are like, all these things become complicated and spiritual and like fanciful and romantic. Those things have nothing to do with the truth. The truth is feet on the ground, practical. But the human plays a very clever game. He doesn't really want it. So then, because he doesn't really want it, then he begins to bring up the five senses and all these things that he learned in the spiritual world, and almost to convince himself that, see, I can't go beyond the five senses, so I can't get the truth. He just plays these games. When you're hungry, do you want food? Yes. When you're thirsty, do you want water? Yes. It's nothing more basic than that. But when it comes to a desire, do you want truth? No, you don't.